Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. Pat O'Toole here, news correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal. This Tuesday, the IFA staged a protest against imported grain at Foynes Port in County Limerick. IFA was protesting against cheap imported grain being sourced by the feed trade at a time when Irish tillage farmers are in the fourth year of below-cost production. Our news reporter Paul Mooney was at the protest and he spoke to IFA's National Treasurer Ger Bergen as well as tillage farmer Eamon McGilligan, but not before Bergen and Port Management had a robust exchange of words about how best to put the protest to an end.
If you're asking me the quickest way to end this, shag off. The ship to shag off. Yeah. That's the quickest way.
And don't come back.
Yeah. If he goes, we'll go. Our issue is with the people here that are bringing in. Our issue is not with G at all.
No,
Our issue is with the trade here. That's. I'll tell you. I'll put it this way to you. The quickest way to bring this to an end is for that lad to go away.
Yeah, but
I'm serious.
but I don't make that call.
Well,
that's what I'm saying.
Well, what you can do is talk to them.
Yeah, well, that's what I can do now, but I don't make that call.
Yeah. He can sit there as long as he likes, but the quickest solution is he goes away. Okay.
What's Ger Bergen, what's the quality of the imported grain like?
Well, I suppose the big issue with the imported grain is, as far as we're concerned, bringing barley into the Irish market when the winter barley harvest is complete, or almost complete, when there's a carryover of top quality barley stocks from last year, that the only reason that this barley is being imported is to destroy the harvest price, bad and all as it is, for Irish grain growers. And to be honest, we're of the view the people that are importing this barley and the people that are handling this barley to do this are traitors to the Irish cereal farmers and the Irish cereal sector. And we're here in the worst year in 7 or 8 years for grain growers after 4 bad years to say to the trade, support Irish native grain, stop this, carry on, we're not going to stand for it.
Eamon McGilligan from Lixknow, County Kerry. What grain do you grow at home yourself?
Spring barley.
Okay, so you're waiting for harvest still?
Yeah,
okay. So why are you here protesting today? What's the problem for grain farmers?
The problem with grain farmers is the return is too small, so we're not covering the costs. A lot of grain farmers, after paying off, so we send their grain to the merchant, and by the time they have the merchant pay, they might steal our money to the merchant for all the inputs they put in.
Do you feed your own grain or do you sell it?
I feed my own grain now.
Okay, yeah, okay. And so we're looking here at shipping the grain imported now. Did you get a look at the grain? What do you think with yourself?
The bushel weight looks very poor grain. That's my general consensus. I think the bushel weight is lower actually.
Yeah.
I don't think to be of great quality grain.
Yeah. And why is it being imported?
It's supposed to be imported cheaper. Okay. And there's probably grain and shelves up the country. There's Irish grain that they could use first before they import this grain.
Yeah, okay.
And we're all on board B, and we're all talking about native Irish and everything, so we should try and look after our own first.
Yeah. And what needs to be done? I mean, whether it's by the minister or by the trade or by Brussels, what could be done, Eamon, that would help things?
How would help it? They need some funding to keep the grain growers for the last 3 years. They have been losing money and can't continue really at the moment. That's something for the IFA and the Minister and the Commission have to talk about.
Okay. And do you see yourself, have you a future in grain long term?
No, I don't think I'll grow grain if it's going to keep this price from the future going.
Eamon, thanks for your time.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Grain was also the topic of conversation at the Tullamore Show over the weekend. Odile Evans spoke to James Hill, IFA grain share for Wicklow, about how tillage farmers are coping and began by asking him how the harvest was coming along on his farm.
Well, currently winter barley harvest is almost complete. Winter oats crop progressing well. I'm not aware of any oats rape being put as yet, but so far winter barley yields have been very disappointing, as have the bushel weights. There are exceptional crops here and there, but the general opinion is that crops are back to about 25%.
And I mean, we're here today at the Tullamore Show and it's wet outside. I mean, obviously that's going to have an impact as well, isn't it? Well,
okay, a wet day now and again doesn't do a whole lot of harm in the grain business, but prolonged broken weather does, because grains not harvested, it's ripe, will deteriorate on the shank. Straw will break down and you'll have higher in-field losses. Now, the winter wheat harvest isn't ready just yet. It will be in about another possibly week, 10 days to be commencing. And then the spring barley harvest, and they will be the main grains, shall we say, in the country. Spring barley crops, initial indications are that they won't be as good as last year. Winter wheat isn't expected to be as good as last year either.
Spring barley might be a little bit better than what we've seen so far in the winter barley, will it?
Not in terms of overall yield, because winter barleys have improved dramatically in the yield levels. That, years ago 4 tonne was a very exceptional crop, whereas nowadays 4 tonne in winter barley is very readily achieved. Spring barley crops haven't advanced to the same degree in terms of yield potential or yield ability, though you're not looking at high yield, and while the costs are lower, they're not proportionately lower relative to the yield loss. But we are looking at a significant number of spring barley crops, particularly the later sown crops on lighter soils or on later soils, that may well only yield sort of 2.5 tonnes at best. So at today's price, that is a loss-making business.
Would it be fair to say there's a bit of frustration that some of the milling companies might not be buying Irish grain?
Well, that's the most incredible thing about it here. We have a massive livestock industry. We need a lot of feed grain in the system. We have feed compounders who insist year on year on importing feed grain that's readily available, particularly barley. We do have a somewhat increased requirement for an imported feed wheat, but that's generally replaced by maize. It's very, very galling to grain farms to see imports of product from countries which aren't subject perhaps to the same regime of costs, countries that may have benefits of scale. And let's face it, we live in Ireland, we do business in Ireland. We would expect our neighbours and our fellow farmers to support farmers. While grain may be cheaper to import from another country this year, that may not be the case next year. But if the Irish grain grower is gone, the livestock sector is very, very exposed to fluctuations in price, quality, availability. And the other area, the provenance of Irish grain, reinforces the provenance of the green image of Ireland and Irish food products in the export markets. And that is what all the exports in this country seem to say we should aspire to. And Origin Green, which is a government-led directive for the food industry, is based around this. Well, now, the whole integrity of the Origin Green labelling in the livestock sector falls apart if that sector is fully or mainly dependent on imported feed from unknown sources.
But ultimately, it's up to each individual farmer to insist on having Irish grain sold to them rather than letting the mill or the merchant decide it. Isn't that, it has to come from the ground up, doesn't it?
Yeah, essentially it is. I mean, it has to be a buyer-led thing. Unfortunately, our state agencies have been derelict in recent times in regard to promotion of Irish grain. Their advice has been, where supplementation is necessary, where pasture is inadequate, to use an imported filler such as citrus pulp or soya hulls, very inferior and very poor value type of product. Essentially, we in Ireland, we should work for Ireland, to the benefit of Ireland, and not be driven by a cost-cutting, low-cost, questionable standard agenda.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Staying with Tinahely, contributor to the Irish Farmers Journal, Una Sinnott, caught up with the lady vice president of the show, Joyce Carney, and asked her how the day was going.
Yeah, we've had a busy day here, especially in the information centre, where people come in all the time and keep us going, asking questions. The most popular attraction here today, I would say, are Willoughby Brothers, the Trees and the Stars. We also had a ladies' heartthrob, Johnny Barry, here from Kilkenny Radio. He certainly had the ladies all flocking to him. We had a super support this year from our traders and sponsors, and to my knowledge there's about 140 stands here.
Very good. And now in terms of attendance, do you think this year's show was as good as any?
This year, unfortunately, the weather is a little bit damp, and I think the figures might be slightly down. Possibly around 8,000 maybe here today.
Yeah, still a great number really. The Tinahely show, it kind of every year stands its own and it always does well, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a great number here, and the people that are here are enjoying what we have on offer.
The Irish Farmers Journal weekly podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Keeping with shows, now in its 25th year, the Tullamore Show is displaying no signs of slowing down, with a 16-page focus on it in this week's Irish Farmers Journal. Our pedigree reporter Shane Murphy spoke to Frieda Kinarney, the show's secretary, and began by asking her how long she's been in the role.
I have been the official role as secretary for about 20 years, which sounds a long time, but it is a long time, but it has flown.
You've been involved since the start, kicked off there back in 91.
I was indeed, yes. I would have been helping out in the cookery section and volunteering in that. So as the years progressed, my role progressed a bit. So
main sponsors, AIB, I suppose they've been a big part of getting the show to where it is today. How long have they been part of it?
This would be their 12th year. We would have taken on the role of the National Livestock Show, which would have been formerly in the RDS in Dublin in, I think, 95. So we would have had a main sponsor in then with the Irish Distillers, and then the AIB came on board with us then as title sponsor of the National Livestock Show. We have a huge working relationship with them and that sort of.
Excellent.
So it works extremely well.
And it's something you definitely need with the shows going forward. You see
so many
shows going
absolutely.
there. 25 years relative to other shows, it's only a baby, I suppose. There's a lot of other shows there going off 100 years. What is it that made Tullamore just kickstart straight from day one?
I'd say the timing of the event was maybe a huge success because, as I say, starting in 1991, and it would have been a local show, and I know the people that were involved in that time, particularly Christy May, had huge visions for the show and would have put the work in to develop it. And we were lucky then, we said, that the National Livestock Show became part of our programme when it did in 95, and it was a huge support in getting people on board with us in sponsorship and exhibiting and that. So, and it has progressed, and there's huge support for it now. And I know we'll say our coveted gold medal for the champions of the different breeds now is something that's very sought after.
Yeah.
And that, so it has built and it has supported. We've worked very hard to keep the freshness there and keep developing it all the time. And that
you're talking about livestock there. We're saying of the 1,000 competitions held at Tullamore annually, over 300 from cattle alone.
Yes.
And when you add in the sheep and your new attraction, the pigs, of course, you've got over 500.
That's true.
It's a massive part of it. We just got through cattle wise. What number is he up around this year?
Well, in total in the cattle we will have about 1,800 cattle on the showground on the
massive,
day. And there'll be about almost 600 sheep. So the National Livestock Show, then you are talking way over 2,000 animals competing, and that. So granted, the prize fund is huge.
It is huge.
Due to the support of our sponsors and that, but even the support like from the entries, the Semental cattle in particular this time have exceptional, like there's over 200 entries, about 216 entries in there just in the Semental breed alone. And in the pedigree cattle section, which is one of the 3 cattle sections of the National Livestock Show, the Semental breed are one of 13 breeds. So the support across the board is massive in that, and we're delighted that, and obviously the people appreciate having the event and the competing, and it adds value to their stock, so they benefit and we benefit in that.
Just there, you talked about the Semental briefly. This year, again, the Semental hold their national show every year, isn't it?
They do indeed, yes.
So this is the biggest number they've ever had. This is the biggest record for any national show, no matter where it was.
Absolutely.
So it's great to see that, and the Hereford, of course, are having their national show there as well. So we better give them the shout out as well.
That is true. And the Limousine, we'll say, would have had their national show with us for the last number of years, but this year it's their World Congress. It will be happening about 2 weeks later then in Kilkenny, but with the plan is that they will be back. We do have the Limousine section, and there are very big numbers entered in that as well. In that,
I mentioned about the pigs, your new interest. This is your first year having pigs on site.
It is.
How you fixed for it?
Well, we would have had a few before, but they would have been just in the rare breeds and pet section and that, for the children. The All-Ireland final is what we're staging. There has been qualifying classes at different shows around the country.
Excellent.
It's a whole new enterprise that has been developed. Our friends in the Pig Association are putting a lot of work into developing it. So we would have, I think there are 8 classes, and the finals of those then with the qualifying exhibits coming from the other shows will be taking place at our show on that.
Super job. I was actually talking to Dermot Allen during the week, the show's director for the society.
That's right.
And he said he's just delighted to get it to a site like Tullamore just for the publicity and get the exposure out there.
We've worked closely with Dermot and that. He is putting great interest and promotion that into it, so we certainly hope it works very well for them. And
it's great to have people like that have so passionate about everything.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
We're just going through a few other events on the day. The Mockra Farm Skill All-Irelands are back to you again, and we got the fashion show, which is hotly contested every year.
Absolutely. We're nearly heading on the lines of the Galway Best Dressed, because this year, for the first year, we actually, as part of the winners' prize, there will be €1,000 cash, because normally the prizes in Best Dress and that tend to be vouchers.
60,000 is what you're kind of hitting on every year.
Yes.
I suppose one of the big questions people probably have out there, we've got the Ploughing Championships, which is a 3-day event, the biggest agriculture one in Ireland, heading to Tullamore as well this year.
That's
Do you
right.
think that'll take for your numbers?
I wouldn't think so, because with our entries, with our trade stands, we've actually experienced this year, we unfortunately were not able to accommodate all the stands we had applications for, so we had to return quite a number. Even some people like that would have been regularly with us in other years, we didn't actually be in a position to facilitate them this year, so it certainly didn't, hinder us in that way at all. The two events are hugely successful events. As I said, the National Ploughing, and people are used to going to both, and they have different agendas and different briefs, and they complement each other extremely well. And the National Ploughing Association are involved with us in sponsorship in that this year. So we work very closely together. There is a good liaise between the people involved in all, so we complement each other rather than compete.
Today we launched the app for the Tullamore Show. How excited are you for this?
Absolutely, because I know I have downloaded it there myself, and obviously we would have been working with you in building it, and the people that have downloaded it so far are amazed with it. I was at a meeting last night now, and we would have been talking about it and they're delighted. There's a huge lot of information in there. It's the type of information that you want at your fingertips and on the phone on the day when you're rambling around, and obviously it will all help to the enjoyment of it.
So anybody looking for that, it'll be on the Play Store and the iTunes shop, be under the Farmers Journal Tullamore app. Thanks very much to Frida for coming in. Everybody going to Butterfield Estate in Bluebell on the 14th of August. Be sure not to miss it. Thank you.
And you can download the Tullamore Show app Shane referred to there for free at ifj.ie/Tullamore Show app.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
In agribusiness this week, IFAC has launched its Farm Financial Planning Booklet for farmers. Agribusiness editor Owen Lowry spoke to John Donoghue, CEO of IFAC, about financial planning, pitching for finance, and the importance of the new booklet.
I suppose, look, we initially put this booklet together back in 2008, and it was all around dealing with the financial collapse that had taken place in worldwide markets and the impact that was going to have in Irish banks, and the actual impact was going to have then in farms, because obviously farms have to deal with banks for finance, and they're dealing with merchants and merchant credit and all that kind of stuff, and credit had dried up substantially in worldwide markets. So we put together this magazine with Farmers Journal at the time, with Peter Young as the primary contributor from the journal and our own contributors in-house as well, and the idea was to equip farmers and educate them to deal with the financial stresses that were going to come as a result of worldwide crisis. Now in 2016 it's becoming a similar situation on farms because of commodity prices. There's serious financial stress involved.
Many farmers listening to this will be very concerned. I suppose they're looking at their bank balances, they're looking at the milk check or their grain check coming in. They're very concerned about, I suppose, the income. What is in this booklet that will help them address some of the concerns that they have?
Well, this book won't help you improve your income. What it will help you do is manage your finances. So I suppose you have lots of things in there, like a cash flow planner and detailed instructions and guides as to how you deal with your bank, how you deal with merchant credit, all those kind of areas. The number one piece of advice is to deal with financial stress early and identify financial stress early. And some people are just not great at doing that on, because they don't have up-to-date figures, they don't monitor their finances enough. And this booklet, if you use the tactics that are in here, will help you to do those things.
It's very evident, looking at the new lending figures that come out from the CSO last year, that more new lending was advanced to the sector than there was in the previous year. So the money seems to be available there.
Absolutely. Good presentation. To finance a project now, realistically, you're going to have 3 years accounts, pretty much up to date. You're going to have a good idea of how your farm is performing now in 2016, and you're going to have to be in a position to do a 3 to 5 year cash projection into the future, showing the benefit of the project that you're actually going to engage in. And the other thing I'd say here on is that it has happened in the past. It's a little bit of a habit that people tend to look at good cash flow in a good year and say, look, I'll spend that on capital investment, I'll build a new shed, I'll buy the new tractor. But eventually that cash going out of the system has to be financed, and you'll find that it'll need to be financed in years where commodity prices are lower and profit levels are lower.
When most farmers hear cash flow, I'm assuming that they run a mile with that big word. It's the big bad word. Will this booklet first of all help them to address that, and if and where can they get further help?
This booklet, I think if anybody consumed it, every page of it, and actually understood it and learned it and took it on board, the messages that are in there, you'd be a lot more financially savvy than you are before you open it, right? Very few people will do that. They'll dip in and dip out as they need it, and possibly when financial stress arises they'll start to dip in a little bit more. But further help is available. We're certainly providing lots of services in this area. In IFAC, we're dealing with farmers every day of the week. It's our speciality. We're a cooperative, and we look after farmers' needs in financial terms.
If we just look at, I suppose, access to finance is one of the issues, but then the cost of that finance. And we've then seen new initiatives come out from some of the co-ops, including Glanbia and now Dairy Gold, and I hear also that Arrivo and Lakeland are working on something. How does a farmer go about accessing those best rates?
That's a very difficult one to do, Owen. I suppose a good relationship with your client manager in the bank is important. Again, it's a case of if you have a good idea of where your finances sit, you're in a better position to negotiate with your bank on rates.
How are you seeing in IFAC the financial situation on farms this year versus last year or the year before?
It's definitely a difficult year for farmers, no question about that. And cash flow is disimproving as we speak, really, because we're heading towards the most expensive part of the year, autumn time, and look, we're not going to have the same returns on farms. So cash flow is definitely tightening. We're seeing that on a day-to-day basis. And would your advice be that farmers, if they find themselves in a tightening situation, that they would talk to their bank sooner rather than later? Absolutely, yeah. As early as a financial stress is identified, if you can see that you're not going to make a payment or that you need to defer some payments, you need to talk to the bank as early as possible. And certainly that's something that we would advise people to do. The cash flow gaps can be fairly significant and unforeseen, and you definitely don't want to arrive in October, November time with a payment to make and not be able to meet it without having talked to the bank.
No, because that can have knock-on consequences for everything else. Yeah,
absolutely, and into the future.
It seems to be a very informative booklet. It's available on the Irish Farmers Journal website, and also I'm told it'll be available at the Tullamore Show and at the ploughing match later in the year. There'll be more details in this week's Irish Farmers Journal. John, thanks very much for talking to me. I think it's an invaluable piece of work that is needed and should be read by every farmer out there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Owen.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Meanwhile, debate continues around the fallout from Brexit, with the ICSA hosting a meeting on the subject last Friday in Letterkenny. Our Northern Ireland news correspondent Peter McCann was there, and he spoke to Stuart Agnew, UKIP spokesperson on agriculture, and began by asking him about the relevance of UKIP post-Brexit.
The initial task for UKIP is to make sure things get carried through. So there are 4 phases in leaving the European Union. The first was to get a referendum in place. The second was to win it. The third is to instigate the Article 50. And the fourth is to actually leave. So we're halfway through that journey. I expect the second half of the journey to take a lot less time than the 23 years of UKIP. It's possible that will be some backsliding, but I've personally been encouraged by the attitude of Theresa May, who has more or less stood back and said, right, they want Brexit, I will deliver Brexit. And the second part to your question, well, we will leave the European Union. What happens to UKIP then? Well, there's an extraordinary meltdown going on in British politics at the moment. A lot of people who voted Labour all their lives are now voting UKIP, and the Labour Party is splitting. And we see a lot of votes to harvest in the north of England. And so we are now deciding as a party how we're going to try and hold that vote, what we need to do it, and become the formal opposition.
As far as policy replacing CAP or support to farmers, yourselves there, whatever your own policy was, or other parties or other independents that were looking out, it isn't really up to them. But what is your feeling, or what do you think?
Every single Conservative MP I've spoken to, whether they're for Remain or Leave, have said that we will support agriculture in this country. The question is how and to what degree. George Eustace, who's come out of this very well, he is now Secretary of State for DEFRA. He's had a promotion. He was a Leave campaign. He was effectively frozen out of that ministry for about 3 months. So he is now in a strong position.
He isn't Secretary of State, he's just a minister now.
I understand he's called Secretary of State for DEFRA. So I understand, but I believe that's what he's called now. But please check it up. He is talking about a price insurance scheme, which I think is a good idea. He's talking about getting futures market to work better, particularly in milk. See, the EU doesn't like futures market in food commodities. They're trying to stop it, make it more difficult, which is a very short-sighted, silly thing to do. We need futures market. Our grain futures market has stood the test of time. And it needs the 3 elements of those who produce the commodity, the grain, those who use it, and speculators to actually set a price. And it's worked. It's worked in Britain, and we need to encourage that model. He's talking about having the same level of support in terms of cash. This is what he's saying, but of course I can talk to him, and I was talking to him only a week ago in London, and but I'm not in the government. But one or two people are asking my opinion on things, which I'm very flattered by. But the point is, if you were to pull the rug, okay, let's just say pull the rug away from farming. Most of those farmers would lose money. Instead of paying tax, they would claim tax refunds. Instead of employing people who are paying tax and national insurance contributions, those people will go on to benefits. So it's not really very clever to pull the rug on agriculture. And, of course, we become more dependent on imports. And this is an island of 70 million people with only 4 or 5 deep water ports that bring all these things in. We're an absolute sucker for terrorism like that. All of these things will go through the government's mind. Remember, they have 2 duties: to defend their people and make sure they have enough to eat.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Moving to the northwest and to forestry, news reporter Anthony Jordan caught up with Adrian Leddy, IFA Leitrim Regional Development Officer, and young farmer Adrian Kelly about the ongoing afforestation of County Leitrim. He began by asking Adrian if this was an emotive issue for people in the county.
Very much so, and we were delighted that Andrew Doyle and that there came down from Dublin to meet us today. It's an issue in a lot of parishes in Leitrim, and mainly it is in relation to investors, foreign investors, and that they're coming into the county, and people from outside the county coming into plant in Leitrim.
And do you want to see a restriction on these people coming in?
We want to see a restriction, very much so. We want a higher level of premium for the farmers that are planting land here in Leitrim, and not the same given to investors. And this is what's putting up the price of land. These people seem to have a slush fund of money to come in here into Leitrim to purchase land, and the local farmer is unable to compete for that land.
And as Regional Development Officer, what are you going to do about it? Or what are the IFA going to do about this issue?
Number one is that we want to see a lot more flexibility by the Department of Forestry. And we want more flexibility, that if a bit of land comes up for auction, that maybe there could be an exchange deal maybe done in certain areas that we had. IFA has been in the process and has negotiated in the past where there has been maybe swaps of land, because the last thing that a farmer wants is that his own private dwelling is surrounded, his own lane into his house is covered over by trees, and maybe that there's land in another area that may be more suitable for forestry.
So you're trying to make it more desirable for older people to sell their land off to people who want to engage in livestock practice?
Absolutely. It's to try and make it there. The other issue is very strongly is that the financial institutions are throwing money at people to plant the land, and if a young farmer or any farmer goes in to look for money to purchase land for mainstream agriculture, he's not getting it.
And have the department listened to you?
The department have listened to us, and we would feel today that the Minister has given us a firm commitment that in relation to notification, one of the issues is that we don't know when the land is going to be planted until the digger moves in. And here we've got a commitment today that the Minister is going to see that a notice and that there is going to be erected at the main entrance and that into the land. And he also would hope that it would be advertised in the local papers as well.
I'm here with Adrian Kelly from Clune in County Leitrim. Adrian, very emotive in that meeting.
Yeah, very emotive. There's a serious issue there on the ground where a farmer can claim his basic payment entitlements as well as claiming his forestry premium, which is unfair, because as a farmer, if you have rushes or bushes or scrub or whatever you want to call it growing on your land, you're docked your basic payment entitlements, and yet these men can come along, plant the land and claim 2 payments on the 1 hectare of land, which to me is unfair.
When you talk about these men, you're talking about the investors that come in from maybe from companies?
Not necessarily. Farmer-owned land, farmer-planted land, where the farmer, if he submitted basic payment form in 2008 and he retains 10% of his holding from 2008 figures, he can plant the rest of his land and claim the forestry premium plus hold on to his basic payment entitlements.
And this is obviously infuriating young farmers like yourself around Leitrim.
Absolutely, and leaving land that it cannot be bought either, because it's so incentivised for the older farmer to plant his land where he can sit back and claim his payments, 2 payments, double whammy.
What is it that you want to see done?
I want to see the Minister, where we outlined to him today, that should be stopped, that he shouldn't allow 2 payments to be claimed on the same hectare of land, i.e. claiming basic payment entitlements and claiming a forestry premium. It's unfair.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Independent analysis conducted into genetic gain in the Northern Ireland sheep industry has shown there is a significant dividend to be achieved if there was more widespread adoption and use of genetic information. Our Northern Ireland editor, David Wright, spoke to Eileen McCloskey of Caffrey and Stephen Morrison of AFBI about the issue this week. David began by asking Eileen how Caffrey can help change the attitude of sheep farmers in Northern Ireland to recording genetic traits in sheep.
As you say, David, we know we have a low level of recording in sheep flocks. I suppose maybe to address that first, I think we have that low level of recording in sheep flocks because number one, labour is one of the biggest issues in farms, and we've been, the idea of extra recording is extra work, and do I have that extra time? So that's a difficult situation. But then, and also then, what is the benefits of that? If I do go to the bother of putting in that extra work, that extra labour, what is the benefits of that? And I think number one, we have to show farmers what would be the financial benefit of actually that recorded information. And I think once you can see a financial benefit of that recorded information, then you can justify the time and the labour requirements that goes into it. So how do we actually increase improve the rates of farmers are actually recording? And it comes back down to try and make the process as simple as possible. Yes, we know the more information you have, the better. But if we can identify and record those key bits of information initially, from a lamb growth point of view, we talked about a birth weight, an 8 to 10 week weight, which gives a really good indication of milk yield, and then that wean weight. And there are 3 key stages in that growth cycle of the lamb that can tell us a lot about the maternability of the ewe and the growth of the lamb. So we have to try and make that as simple a process as possible for farmers to record those 3 key weights, and also then provide somewhere where they can feed that information back and we can return a value with that. How recording those weights can actually help make improvements and adjustments to your farm and to your business.
And Stephen, you were talking about genetic improvement, and that's your role at current, looking at how we can take the industry forward in terms of animal genetics. How does that work for you in terms of you've got farmers maybe recording more information, but that's vital for you if you want to take the industry forward in terms of genetics.
Yeah, David, you're right. Yeah, I'm working on behalf of the Food Strategy Board to really look at the best way forward for improving our rates of genetic gain. And one of those ways is increasing recording, and as Eileen said, make recording much simpler, much easier and more connected. We have a lot of data in our supply chains already. How can we make the most of that? It's already there. Let's link it together. Let's get it talking to each other. The other aspects, as Eileen's mentioned too, is if we can really show clear demonstrations of genetics resulting in pounds and pence in the commercial producer's pocket, that will then drive both the supply of the genetics that does that and also the demand going forward so we get the increased rate of gain. So it's really about connecting up the data that's in the supply chain in a simple, easy way to do it, but also then showing the clear benefits of selection and genetic improvement.
And Eileen, we're on Campbell's farm here, who's been recording information for a number of years. What is he seeing coming through? Like, what's happening here that's commercially important to him?
Yeah. Well, I suppose one of the things that we would say about Campbell's is it's probably a very the recording and performance is very much maternal based, and that's vitally important. I mean, we would say a lot of the thing it's breed irrelevant. The same principles apply to whatever breed you work with. Campbell, he said he's pushing forward maternal traits here, and we know that's vitally important. So he'll be finding that less difficult data lambing, less requirements for input at lambing. That's going to be a massive saving in relation to labour, better maternal ability, so that you then in theory was fit to take that lamb forward to weaning, which is vitally important. From a terminal sort of aspect, Campbell would say himself that he's starting to see better growth rates in his rams, or overall better growth rates, and we know that's one of the key things. If you improve the lamb numbers and you can increase the growth rates in them, that's going to be the 2 key drivers to profit. So as I said, Campbell's maternal focus, which is very important because the industry has lagged behind in that, and we need to improve those maternal traits while also keeping an eye on growth rates and carcass confirmation.
And finally, Stephen, you're obviously trying to take Northern Ireland forward in terms of genetics. Are we getting left behind currently? How important is it that we do start to record more information and see in the south with Sheep Ireland and with other various initiatives around animal genetics, genomics? Are we getting left behind?
There is the risk of being left behind. There's a lot of countries, be it Australia, New Zealand, the Republic of Ireland, all moving collectively together to push genetic progress. There are pieces of work going on in the mainland UK, and it's making sure that we're at least achieving the rates of gain that others are, but even potentially better, so we maintain our competitive advantage, being a grass-based system. So again, it's partly making sure we're at the same pace as other countries, but actually push it further. The options are there, the technology is coming. We can then start to have animals that are growing at the right rates, have the maternal traits to have easy lambing, but also then producing that quality of product, that lamb that the consumer is demanding more and more. So we keep the supply and demand start to push things forward. But yeah, no, in terms of where we are internationally, I'd say the rates of gain terminally we're moving on in terminal traits. Maternal we've probably lagged behind, as Eileen said, but I think that's probably fairly common across many countries. But it's now that recordings becoming easier, the technology is moving on, that everyone can now start to look at maternal traits and start to record them better. So the technology is enabling things to happen. So again, Northern Ireland, what my task to do for the Food Strategy Board is really develop up the strategy to help Northern Ireland do that and move forward.
Okay, Eileen and Stephen, thank you very much.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Finally, in Country Living this week, consumer editor Ciara O'Kelly talks to Margaret Hawkins about the prices for different types of health scans in Ireland. She began by asking Margaret where you stand if you don't have health insurance, and how much one of these scans would cost.
Well, what I found out, I suppose, was a bit of a surprise, actually, that those kinds of scans don't cost as much as I think most people believe. Years ago, we'd have all heard about these things costing maybe €800 or €1,000, and they did cost that back in 2000. But over the years, the prices have dropped, and I was surprised to find out in a straw poll survey of the providers of such scans that generally things like MRIs are about €200 to €300. That's per area scanned, which isn't too bad. CT scans, CAT scans, they work out about between 195 and 270. And X-rays are less expensive, they're 65 to 120. And ultrasounds range from about 95 to 251, depending on what area of the body they are. So, and DEXA scans are about, for the osteoporosis, they're about €100 everywhere. So I'd say that would come as news to a lot of people. It certainly did to me.
That's very interesting, Margaret, and I agree with you. I don't think a lot of people realise that the costs are that much. I suppose when you're talking about in around €800, they can seem very, very out of reach, but the numbers you quoted are a bit more reasonable. What is the reason for the reduction in price?
Well, I put that question about the reduction in price. I put that to the head of IFA, that's one of the providers in the country, the main kind of standalone provider. And his response was that there are a lot of factors involved, but it's mostly demand and improved technology, so that's why the prices are coming down.
Margaret, you also talk in the article a bit about waiting lists and the differences between the public and private systems. Can you tell me a bit more about this?
There is a huge difference in the time it takes to get a scan between the public system and the private system. It's actually quite shocking, and the Irish Cancer Society did a report. They did a survey of GPs to find out what the waiting lists were like, and I'm afraid it didn't make great reading. 20 times longer to wait in the public systems for an MRI brain scan. So if you had a worry now about your brain, that would be very, very difficult. Chest x-rays, they were easy enough, but you'd wait kind of a few days as a public patient and you get them very easily. Abdominal ultrasounds, you get them done in over 5 working days as a private patient if you had the medical cover. And as a public patient, however, you could be waiting 80 working days. So there's a lot of time for worry there, in the middle of all that.
So, Margaret, you said there about there being a huge difference between the two systems. So are medical card patients getting fed up and actually paying for tests rather than putting up with the stress of waiting months and months?
That was what I was trying to find out, and I was interested to see that on one of the scan providers' websites they said that they had a discount for medical card patients. And I said, there must be lots of people actually getting them done, and that is actually the case. In relation to MRIs with the group I mentioned, IFA, 17% of the people, the self-pay patients, who went in off the street, 17% of those who got MRIs done were actually medical card patients who didn't want to wait and didn't want to, to wait on the results. And it's really important that, I suppose, that for how it improves the system, and I was looking at other countries as well, that they actually, if you can get the scans or the tests done quickly and locally and easily, it solves the problem for a lot of people, because not everybody has a serious condition, and that's the end of the story. And you don't have the big waiting list and everything, and doctors can relax and patients can relax. So it's really important that they're done. But it's that was the news, that quite a lot of people are actually getting tests done. They're putting their hands in their pocket and getting them done just to be free of that stress.
And Margaret, tell me about the doctors' opinions on this. What are they experiencing in regards to medical card patients paying for their own tests?
I put that question to the ICGP spokesperson, and his answer was that it happened not infrequently. That was his term. So it is happening that doctors, would be worried and patients worried, and they get the test done and maybe it's fine, there's no problem and you can forget about it. But the other thing is that what seems to be happening is that if the news isn't good, say a lump is problematic or whatever, that the doctors are actually contacting consultants within the public system, and I suppose based on their good relationship with them, saying, look, I think there's a problem here, please could you see the person a little bit quicker. So that is happening, and I think there's overall maybe things will improve in the future, because there are pilot schemes going on where private providers are being paid by the HSE to do the scans that bit quicker. So it might take a while to come in, but and it's not much consolation to you if you're on a waiting list right now, but I think it's good to know what the actual costs are.
So that's heartening to hear that the situation may improve over time. It's certainly a very interesting article, and all the details are in this week's Irish Country Living. Thank you, Margaret.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.